I'm just so honored to have them both here today. And so I look forward to hearing the conversation. It really is an honor. So I'll ask kindly that Charles introduce himself a bit more and set that stage for our conversation today. All right, thank you, Charles.
Excellent. Just to round out the afternoon, so I'll speak for maybe 6 to 7 minutes, and then we have this wonderful video, which lasts about 8 minutes, and then I'll be asking Jim about 8 to 10 of his paintings, so it'll be the dialogue. It's been interesting looking at my old notes. I used to teach the Odyssey and the Great Books program at St. Olaf, but I looked at my college notes, and one of them was kind of, I can't believe I wrote it down, but my professor said, be careful if you are sleeping with either a god or a goddess. It's very dangerous. And which actually does speak to the first painting that we'll talk about with Calypso after the video. I thought I would begin with this brief passage from G.K. Chesterton, an essayist, because I think it especially describes Jim's work. There is at the back of every artist's mind something like a pattern or a type of architecture. The original quality in any person of imagination is imagery. It is a thing like the landscape of his dreams, the sort of world he would wish to make or in which he would wish to wander. And that is what certainly the Odyssey is all about. Actually, the Odyssey, which takes its name from its hero, Odysseus, is related to the Greek word hados, which means road. So it's very much about travel and place. For those who haven't just read the Odyssey this morning, I do recommend Emily Wilson's translation, which came out about 5 years ago. Everybody got Odyssey fever after reading it, and if anybody would like to borrow it after our afternoon conversation, you'd be most welcome to. So the Odyssey and the Iliad are the two oldest poems we have in the West. They're roughly equal in length, 25 books, which is basically 25 chapters, and were composed in the 8th century BCE, around 750, depicting the Trojan War, which, if it occurred, and scholars disagree, but would be during the Bronze Age, around 1200 BCE. So the Odyssey, like the Iliad, had a dynamic oral tradition in the past, but then it was codified. It's traditionally believed to have been brought together by Homer, the blind poet. Of course, there are multiple theories. And I should note that these are actually intended to be sung, and they were sung, for example, at the Olympics and on great high occasions. And the whole time period of both the Iliad and the Odyssey would be 20 years. The siege of Troy would be 10 years, and the journey home for Odysseus would be 10 years. It's been estimated that if you walked by land from the site of Troy back to Ithaca, you could do it in 10 and a half days. But it didn't mention whether you were being hounded by Poseidon, the son of a Titan, who's after you at every stage, the god of water and earthquakes. So it might take you 10 years also. So don't try this unless you pack more than the lunch. Okay. One of the main themes of the Iliad is glory. The Greek word for that is kleos, and kleos in the Homeric world was very bloody. It was won by violence on the field of battle, and it often comes up when you raise the armor that you've removed by the person you vanquished. So it was a terrifying and dreadful kind of reputation. What's clear in both books is that we are all mortal versus the deathless gods. And so glory was one of the ways in which you might establish some kind of earthly immortality. Interestingly enough, as we move to the Odyssey, the theme of kleos goes very much to the background when Odysseus goes to the land of Hades and he sees Achilles. and Achilles is in mourning and dread. And he was given the choice of either a long life dying at home or a short life but full of glory. And he chose a lifetime full of glory. But in Hades, he said, I would rather be a slave in the world than a dead hero. So that the notion of glory is dimmed. The major theme, well, there are 3 or 4 actually, but is the Greek word is nostos, which is homecoming. And this is the hero's journey home. The Odyssey has been, by the way, especially important for veterans returning from war. It achieved, a great deal of attention after the Vietnam War in particular. The other major theme is the recovery of love, actually. The Odyssey begins in Ithaca, which is missing its king, Odysseus. It's missing a husband, and the boy, a young man, we estimate, just looking into this world, he would be about 20 years old. This is the son who was Telemachus, who was just coming of age. So you have a loss of the 3 graces in Ithaca when the book 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5 begin. Giving, receiving, and returning. The giving of love, the receiving of love, and the returning of love. It's not happening. No king, no father, no husband. And that we eventually see through this nostos the recovery of these, but at great price. What I'd like to do is perhaps just make 3 general observations. One is that these are the first examples of literature that we could call fantastic. By that, I don't mean simply fantasy, but these are works of imagination that you find further in Virgil and Beowulf, and even today in many of the contemporary works that arrest our imagination. There's a great book by Matthew Dickerson and David O'Hara called From Homer to Harry Potter. And there really is an extraordinary kind of way to trace elements from the Odyssey to these contemporary myths. For example, the way Odysseus is recognized, one of the ways when he returns to Ithaca, is by him answering questions that only he would have known as a boy. But the other way he's recognized by his nursemaid is by a scar that he received in a hunting accident. And how is Harry Potter recognized? The boy who would not be killed is by a scar on his forehead. So a lot of the themes get trafficked out, and even Star Wars, I am your father. That's a definitely key line in the Odyssey. The second major theme in both books, but especially in the Odyssey, is Xenia, or the guest-host relationship. And this is going to seem totally foreign to all of us. Maybe this has happened to you, but when you have a stranger come to your place, if you were practicing Xenia, Charlie, you would have them place their weapons at the door. You would then provide them with a bath, of course, a fine meal with wine, and then you would provide them with a bed for the night and safety. This was protected by Zeus. And you wouldn't ask their name until the morning. The guest-host relationship was so important. You actually, and you find this in the Odyssey, sometimes they just call the person guest or host until the names are actually given. And in the Iliad, in battle, when an Achaean, that is a Greek, is with a Trojan and they're fighting, they realize they had a guest-host relationship in the past. They cease fighting, they exchange armor, and they go separately, peacefully. The other theme is romantic love. I was brought up with professors who told me that romantic love didn't exist before the Renaissance, chivalric poetry. But actually it's in the Odyssey. And what I would do, I'm tempted to do it to ask you, but I think I'll play it safe. I ask my students, if your significant other has been absent from you for 20 years, what are the 3 things you'd want to do? Okay, well, let's let you think about that for a little bit. But the students usually get it right, and this is from the Odyssey. You'd share your stories, you would make love, and then you would want to sleep together. Now, if that's not romantic, I don't know what romance is. And Athena, and in her honor, I'm wearing an owl tie. The owl is her bird, in case you were wondering what's that doing there. That's her bird. And she keeps the sun from coming up too early, so Odysseus and Penelope can enjoy all 3 of those things. That concludes my Cliff Note summary, and I think we're now ready for the video.
Come on in. I'm Jim Conaway. Come into my studio. I'm 92 years old. I'm an artist in Minneapolis. I've been in this studio for a little over 35 years. The sunlight, it controls when I get here. It's around 9 o'clock in the morning. As you can see, nice big windows. You have just wonderful lighting in here. I love the white walls where I hang things that are done or things that are in progress. The gallery part of it just happened. It wasn't part of a plan. I particularly like this wall. We do a lot of traveling, and a good idea was to collect some things for this wall. This is my work spot over here. When I moved into this building and had this studio, I was making much larger paintings. I couldn't have a small easel. I need to have something bigger. So I put 2x4s up, and then I'm able to do that and pick it up. I put a place here for supplies, and everything else here is within my reach, just, here and there. My paint table has grown. It started off about this big, and then I found a bigger table, and I needed a place with some mediums that I mix with the oil and turpentine, and it's built up with a lot of stuff. It's just got a lot of colors on it, and empty tubes and full tubes, and I used to clean the palette every night before I left. Well, I haven't cleaned the palette in 20 years. A friend of mine came in here one day and he said, "Let me do your portrait." I said, "Well, if you'll let me do yours." He did a portrait of me and I did a portrait of him. This is the one he did of me. I don't know what he did with mine. Maybe he has it. Most of the time I'm up here working, and then I say, I better just go see what this looks like. So then I decide, okay, what I want to do, and can make up or mix up a color, and then go up there with a bigger brush than this, and just really and then I go back here and think, well, I don't like that. I thought it was going to work, but it's not. So I take a rag, dip it in turpentine, and wipe it off down here. So it's that process for 6 hours a day, until I finally finish the painting. My very first oil painting was done when I was 13 years old. It was oil on canvas. I eventually joined the Navy, and I was sent to the Mediterranean, and I just got more interested in the architecture and the painting and things like that. This past series, I was going to my bookcase and going to look for something to read, and I found my old Odyssey book, and I got it out and started looking at it and reading a little bit. It was very interesting, more interesting than I actually thought. One of the important stories is the blinding of Polyphemus. As you see, little spurts of blood up there, but I tried not to make it dramatic. But two of the crew sharpening these pieces of wood, and when Polyphemus was passed out on the rocks, then that's when they came together and blinded him. This is the beginning of the Odyssey. If this was not here, this wouldn't have been an Odyssey. They would have gone home and had a very happy life at home. Well, one of the most interesting paintings, I think, in this series is the city of Troy. They were a very wealthy city, and when I was thinking about the city, how am I going to make it look? I just started off by making shapes, the horizon here, and what I ended up with is when it goes from darker then into lighter, and the columns, let's say these small lines like that look like columns. And we see that they melt into each other, which gives an impression of more space. And these become bigger and stronger. And I think that's what interested me in that painting, is the shadows of the sunlight and the shadows in the architecture. I've never seen a god, so I just built a lot of strange figures and kind of wound around each other, and shapes like this with an eye and a mouth that had some human qualities to them. I title it Poseidon's Family, and that's about the only thing I think would fit here. Ithaca, in my mind, is a beautiful place, and I tried to make it as beautiful as I possibly could. I heard descriptions in the book and ideas about the island, and I think that it was home, it represented home to Odysseus and his men. I suppose similarity between these white areas and this area is probably the same technique and the same idea of building space, bringing something forward, pushing something back. And even reflections, that was just probably an accidental thing, but I think it works. The story of their returning home, that's been the war stories ever since the Trojan War. I was hoping that the figures would show no fear, making it through all the battles. It's a happy story. I really had a lot of fun with this, and it was interesting because I've never done anything quite like this. Working with personalities, I liked the darker, somber colors of two paintings, how that's going to affect the personality of the whole story. So I've been thinking, oh, what about the Iliad?
I'm going to ask Jim about 8 to 10 paintings. We'll start with the one on Jim's left, the island of Calypso. I'll mention one just background is Calypso is an immortal nymph and is offering Odysseus' immortality if he stays with her. And this is the longest state of, in a way, captivity on his journey of some 7 years. Calypso means veiled, by the way. And when we got the term apocalypse, meaning being unveiled. But Jim, could you talk to us about this painting, what decisions he made, and how this came together?
I know that the island had lots of wild animals. I don't know whether they were trained or whether they all eat the people on the island. I'm not sure about that. But I tried working with animals, and they just didn't work for me. And so I started thinking about the water and the Poseidon and his building all of these waves and currents and everything to control where Odysseus is going or pushing him somewhere. And so I thought about organic, just flowers or leaves or something like that. Maybe sometimes the look of an animal, but I didn't want to go there. So, but basically all of these are just flowers and leaves, but very large. And then I know that he wanted to leave, and she didn't want him to go, but I think she actually told him where the lumber was so he can build a raft.
Well, it's a. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, I mean, the immortality, I think, was an important part of that, And
yeah, I think this is a real fulcrum in the whole story. And as my old professor said, someday you're going to have to make a choice to stay with a god or goddess on an island or come home and actually have a family. But this is a choice of where Odysseus is weeping every night, longing for home, and she's very dangerous. And so even when she taunts him and says, by the way, when you go home, Penelope will be older. And he said, yes, Penelope will not be as beautiful or powerful as you. And yet she is the one whom I love. So it's a powerful moment. Actually, maybe jumping to this painting of Penelope.
obviously, he was gone for many years, and the people who lived on the island wanted a king, and they didn't know how they were going to get one other than marrying her. So this is the important direction of this particular painting, where the suitors, you can see several suitors standing around, but she is weaving something. Now, I had no idea what a loom was like at that time. So anyway, I just put a bunch of lines together. Yeah, well, it was okay. So, and so her plan was to marry one of the suitors when she finished a shroud that she was doing for her father-in-law. And so she would work on it at night and both during the day. But the problem was she would work on it during the day, and during the evening she would take it down in the basement, so to speak, and untie it and unweave it. And then the next day she would pull it up there for people to watch, and then she's making this shroud. And eventually, I think it was one of her ladies told someone that she was tearing it apart at night.
Penelope is in a state of danger here,
Yeah.
as well as her son. So there's a kind of sinister nature of this. And when Odysseus returns, he's often disguised. So I think you do in some of the paintings you have him.
Yeah, well, that was something that Homer said, that he doesn't want to be recognized by anyone. So, when I first started working on this, was about 3.5 years ago. I decided that if he didn't want to be recognized, I had him usually just no more than just a black cylinder and facing away, not facing out. And so in a lot of the earlier paintings, that's, you could pick out Odysseus because you could see him from the back, and he was black. And so
the suitors, as I said, were dangerous, and I know this next painting depicts Telemachus, and the suitors actually plan to murder or execute Telemachus, the son of Penelope and Odysseus. So he's about 20 years old, having his father having left him when he was still a baby to go with Agamemnon and Menelaus to Troy. But can you, perhaps we could transition to this painting a little bit, if you could say something.
Yeah, it's Telemachus is the tall, slender, and all of the suitors told him to go find his dad, dead or alive. We want to know what we're dealing with. So Menelaus, he ran to Menelaus, and Menelaus says, "He's dead. Just go back home." And Athena, who was standing in the middle of the group back there, she's usually invisible. She can make herself invisible, or in this one, I chose to see her, and she said, "Go back home. He's headed to your home. So go back home." And so that's what Telemachus does, go back home. And so that basically is the story behind these figures.
Yeah, the first 5 books are of Penelope and Telemachus in search of Odysseus or mourning him. There is a lot of weeping in the Odyssey. A lot of feasting, a lot of profane feasting and sacred feasting. This is where the suitors are involved in profanation or sacrilege, that is, seeking to murder this young man who is completely innocent and who's standing up for himself. Now, the next painting we thought of discussing is actually in the other room, but let's stay here. And I bet you, if you even glance at it, you will it'll come to you visually. It's the time when Odysseus, at the behest of Circe, goes to Hades. This is a depiction of the dead that actually finds its way to the Aeneid with Virgil. It's used by Dante in the Inferno and Purgatory. So it's a very wrought and a powerful image. And what you've done there, I think, Jim, is quite outstanding. I was wondering if you could speak to how you chose the composition you did.
Well, I knew that he wanted to go see his sailors or soldiers that were killed, and so he decides to go there, and when he gets there, he's shaken because he sees his mother there, and he didn't know his mother had died, but she was there just as big and colorful as ever. And then they started bringing in, or the people that were there, the important people were stuck on a Corinthian capital in the painting. The capital was almost even with the floor, but there was a lot of dungeon kind of stuff below that. And then he is in there also, turned away from us. So you know who he is, but he's not showing his face. But Achilles was an important figure to him, and so I put him on that capital, the Corinthian capital, which is a very popular form of architecture. And so that's why he is on there, and several other ones are also laying on there. But
it's a very powerful painting. If you haven't spent time with it, I would really recommend that. And Jim's choosing to give center stage to Odysseus coming to terms with his mother is also extraordinarily moving. He reaches to embrace her 3 times, but is unable to do so, unable to embrace. Wondering if we could look at two paintings here. The one of Polyphemus, you've referenced it already, that's the one by Muriel. This is an act that does pit Poseidon against Odysseus for the next 8 or 9 years of his journey, but it contrasts with the Phoenicians' show of hospitality. So on the one hand, which is here, so the Phoenicians, they are the ones that actually get Odysseus home, and they feast him, and actually it is during their feasting, their banquet for him, that Odysseus tells the story of Troy and of his journey. And you've already said to us something about the blinding of Polyphemus, but the contrast here is so dramatic, the one being pacific, the other being volatile.
this is the scene almost in every book, any painting you see, it's of this scene of the blinding of Polyphemus. And I don't know, I didn't want to do that, but I decided, well, I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to make it bloody and you know, things like that. So anyway, I'm sure you probably know the story, but the men were hungry, and so they decided to go on to an island and find some animals that they could eat. So they found a cave, and it had a lot of goats in it. Some people say pigs or something else, but I think it was goats. And so they, one of the things that Polyphemus wasn't as angry at the men for eating some of his goats as he was for not waiting for him. What the politeness of telling someone, come into my house so you can have, some of my food, and sit down, and maybe with not a glass of wine. I don't think Polyphemus had any wine.
But Odysseus did.
Odysseus did. Well, anyway, actually Polyphemus grabbed one of the men and ate the man. And So, I mean, this could be quite a story, you know, and quite a painting too. But anyway, they all got drunk, but Polyphemus got drunk and he passed out. So how were they going to get out of that cave? I think there was a boulder or something they rolled in front of the door. And anyway, when Polyphemus passed out, they decided they were going to blind him. So they get these two sticks, make a point out of them, and then run in and stick these points in his eye. So it's not quite as gruesome as it could have been. So, and then Poseidon tells him he will never see home again. My sea will keep you here forever. Because that was Poseidon's son that they just killed. So Poseidon, the god of the water, the seas, made sure that every current that got in his way, you know, he will never go home. So anyway, that's the end of that story. But he does go home.
Yeah, the one kernel of the story, one aspect we might mention is that this is part of the education of Odysseus. First, as Jim was pointing out, there was something that Odysseus himself was not respecting Xenia by just simply going in and consuming things without leaving their weapon at the door and then asking permission as a guest. But what Odysseus says, he's asked, Polyphemus asked his name, and he says, "I am no man." And so when the other Cyclopses are alarmed at this screaming, and he said, they say, "Who did this to you?" And he said, "No man did this to me." And so they thought, well, no man did this to you. What is the problem? But Odysseus can't resist not being recognized for his valor or cleverness. And so he says, "I am Odysseus, the son of Laertes." And then the Cyclops hurls a boulder, towards the ship. They go uninjured at that point. But that is one of the aspects of where Odysseus has to learn to temper his vanity and the like. Mm-hmm. Well, sort of coming full circle, and I know that in the video you've spoken of it, and so I want to see if you would like to say anything more about the contrast between the painting of Ithaca, and I believe you said you probably have not, even though you were in the Eastern Mediterranean for 3 years, I think you hadn't actually visited the island of Ithaca.
I hadn't. It's in the Ionian Sea, so it was a little out of the way from Athens. But I worked on about the same time the work of Ithaca and Troy, and he was a man who loved home, and I wanted to make the home as beautiful as I could, and pretty landscapes have a short history sometimes. But anyway, I thought that this would be a good place for him to return home. He would wonder why he wanted to get home, and of course he got home alone. He didn't have any of his men with him. They've all been, you know, they were killed
They're
or
all
died.
killed or died by accident, yes.
Yeah. And so he's there by himself. So I guess I liked the beautifulness of, and I don't know, I hate to say it, a beautiful painting, but I do like it.
I'll say it. It's a beautiful painting. And you really bring out why one would seek that as one's home, a place to wander and to be home. Auden's definition of home comes to mind. Auden said, there are many places you can enter, many places you can leave from, but home is the one place where you can come and go. Ideally, when you're free and you're healthy, this is the place of dwelling. That there's much more dwelling. And Troy wanted to say anything finally about that. I will just mention many who have read the Iliad or sung it have come out on the Trojan side.
Yeah.
Think of the name. I looked up, there are 23 cities in the United States named Troy. And actually London was once, there's a rumor that it was called Old Troy. And in the Aeneid, the story of the founding of Rome by Virgil actually is a Trojan. So the Trojans come out pretty well for some, even though they were on the losing side.
Well, they were very wealthy people because they had control all over the east end of the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. They controlled all of the traffic that goes into the Black Sea and out again. So they, you know, and it was the most guarded city, and extremely wealthy. So I don't know whether it looks wealthy.
You did an excellent job. Yes, I once asked my professor, was the Trojan War true? And he said, it's true, and we're still fighting for Helen, but Helen is petroleum. We're still fighting for that.
Well, you know, the horse, the big wooden horse, is kind of I don't know what it's one of the ugliest things I've ever seen. But there was supposedly a real horse, and it was Odysseus who actually was his idea to take the horse, fill it with men, and go in or leave it there, and then the Trojans would think that they've been freed, you know, so they bring it in on the inside, and of course they come out, and all the Trojans had been drinking and celebrating the departure of the Greeks. And so, but anyway, Odysseus was his idea. So, and he was a very famous hero, I guess you would say, in the Trojan War. And that's why he didn't want to be popular, and he would go in disguise most of the time.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Jim is going to be available for conversation, really, and I would just like to close with, I've adjusted the poem by Cavafy. It's a 19th century poem called Ithaca. You're probably familiar with it, but I've got my own version here. As you set out for Jim's vision of Ithaca, hope your road is a long one. Keep Jim's vision of Ithaca always on your mind. Arriving there is what you're destined for, but don't hurry the journey. Don't leave the gallery too soon. Linger a bit and talk to Jim. Better it lasts for years. So when you reach the Ithaca, you will be wealthy with wisdom, and all the lessons that you have learned with Jim along the way. Thank you, Jim, for this great body of work. He's still here, so come and get him.